Today's episode has been brought to you by OfferingTree. If you have been listening to this podcast, then you already know that OfferingTree is what I use to register students for my online classes, workshops, and trainings, because they are an amazing company who is listening to what yoga teachers and studios actually need. If you are wanting a simple and professional online presence, they will help you with your schedule, with booking classes, taking payments, hosting online videos and resources, Zoom integration, email, and much, much more. Go to offeringtree.com/Shannon for a special podcast listener discount. Also, before we get into today's podcast episode, I want to invite you to sign up for the workshop with Jessica Grossman and Alyssa Toomey that's happening November 3rd, 2022. It goes along with today's podcast so well and last week's as well. It's called Blurred Lines, the harmful intersection of diet culture and yoga. And Jessica and Alyssa are both yoga teachers who are registered dietitians, educated in disordered eating. This workshop really is a must for all yoga teachers. I cannot highlight this enough, that I hear cues and language and I see marketing that until you know, we just don't know as yoga teachers. And so I know that some of my cues have really changed through the years with this type of education, with being able to see where is diet culture showing up in our yoga spaces. And that is why I'm so excited that we get to learn together. So the Connected Yoga Teacher is actually hosting this workshop. And we asked two amazing guest experts to teach it because we feel so strongly that all yoga teachers need this information. To sign up, head on over to theconnectedyogateacher.com. You can look under training and events, or go to theconnectedyogateacher.com/anti-diet. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. If you're new here, oh my goodness, thank you for finding us. If you are a returning listener, thank you. Your support means a lot. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, and this podcast is being recorded on Anishinaabeg, Odawa, and Mississauga land, also called the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. And right now, this weekend up here in Canada, it's Thanksgiving. If you're listening to this episode, it comes out October the 10th, I believe, of 2022. Maybe you're listening later and maybe Thanksgiving is still coming up for you if you're in the US. But here in Canada, we celebrate in October. And I'm really excited that we actually get to dive into a topic today that fits in really nicely with Thanksgiving, because we usually gather and we eat food together. And I think it's very important that we notice our language, notice what we're saying around Thanksgiving, around the people that we meet with regards to diet culture and bodies. Alrighty. Also, if you are new here, you might not know that I'm a mom of three, a yoga teacher, and founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. I'll tell you a little bit more later on today of what's happening inside of Pelvic Health Professionals, give you a little sneak peek of what's coming up. If you are a returning listener, you know how things go over here. This podcast was really created for you, the yoga teacher, so that each and every week, as you're driving to your classes, as you're maybe cleaning your house or walking your dog or doing all of the things that you do to keep things running in your life, you get to listen and be connected with information and ideas that will support you as you build your yoga business. And I get it. You know, combining all of the learning that we're doing with yoga and being good humans along with running a business, it can feel like, where is the yoga in this? There's a lot to think about. And that is why I'm excited that we have podcasts like today's, where you can really take in the information and not have to sign up for a whole huge, long training, but be able to listen to a podcast on the go. And like I said, today's episode goes along very nicely with last week's as well. And there's one other one that we did a while back with Tabitha Farrar, and I'll make sure to link to those in the show notes in case you want to learn more. And please do sign up for the workshop as well to learn more about this topic and to really dig in to see how can we help serve our students and how can we avoid harm. So as I said, this week's podcast, we are digging into a topic that goes hand in hand with last week's discussion on diet culture. This week, we're talking about eating disorder recovery. We definitely do cover diet culture as well. And this is important for our yoga teachers to know. Eating disorders are a serious condition that can be life-threatening or fatal in some cases. And we may not always recognize that someone is experiencing an eating disorder. I would say most of the time we have no idea as yoga teachers. But globally, 9% of the world population is affected by eating disorders, and this number is increasing each year. So where does yoga come in with eating disorders? How can we as yoga teachers really have the education and information so that we can support our community and also not cause harm? Accidentally or inadvertently, we might be saying things that really push against and cause more harm. And I know yoga teachers do not want to do that. And that's why we've invited Vivian Selles here today to share her insights. So Vivian is an experienced registered yoga teacher and Yoga Alliance continuing education provider. She teaches full-time in eating disorder recovery centers in Charlotte, North Carolina, and uses her practice and teachings to cultivate positive change in the yoga community. As a yoga teacher, her intention is to create and hold safer, accessible spaces for people to connect to the practice and show up as they are. Vivian has also co-founded a local yoga coalition for equality. I can't wait until you hear me ask Vivian about this and then realize, we've actually met on Zoom. In our conversation today, Vivian and I discuss why yoga teachers need to not talk about how much or what to eat, and how this can really feed into the harm around diet culture. Vivian also shared many useful and practical tips around the language we use in our yoga classes, including how to avoid cues that may demonize certain body parts, excluding competitive and comparison language, as well as how we can make our language and cues more invitational and open-ended for students. We also dig into scope of practice as yoga teachers while we're supporting people who are in eating disorder recovery, and how having a referral team can help. Connected yoga teachers, Vivian is an amazing yoga teacher, an amazing human, and I was just blown away by this conversation. I'm so excited that we can learn from her together. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Vivian. It is so great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am excited that we get to dive in and talk about diet culture and the yoga world and disordered eating. Before we get into that, can you tell our listeners what is the work that you do and who do you do it for?
Sure. So I teach yoga full-time, primarily in eating disorder treatment centers. I specialize in working with folks who are in eating disorder recovery. I also teach for Yoga for Eating Disorders, which is an online virtual school through that Jennifer Selles has, and I'm on her teaching as well as her faculty, like mentoring faculty.
And did I also see that you co-founded a local coalition for equality? What is that?
I did, correct. Yes, thank you. I co-founded with 4 other yoga teachers it's called the Yoga Coalition of Equality Charlotte. And basically, we cultivate conscious connection through conversation by holding safer and more accessible spaces. And that's a part of the Sankalpa that we've created. We honor yoga's origins by embodying the 8-limbed path. And we really empower our coalition by providing accountability through self-regulation and education.
Now I'm starting to wonder if I just showed up to one of those meetings. Do you have online Zoom meetings? Would I have found this through Rauda, or is this a different group?
Yeah, this is the same as with Rauda. No, this is the same thing. Rauda is one of the folks I co-founded it with.
So just so our listeners know, in context, I was like, oh, cool. I want to show up to that. That sounds like a really great thing. And then partway through, when everyone was introducing themselves, because everyone was from North Carolina, I thought, am I supposed to be here? And it
Remember
was,
that.
yeah.
I loved it.
I felt very welcome. So it's not from the group that I was just like, is it okay because I'm Canadian and not from this state? Yeah, what a great group it is as well. It's amazing work that you're doing. So we are going to talk today about diet culture. Will you first define what does that even mean?
Sure. The way that I define diet culture is it is a system of beliefs that upholds a paradigm. And really, it's a paradigm that equates thinness with being healthy and more morally virtuous. And it aligns more with dominant culture beauty ideals.
This is super important. What you just said, well, the one thing that stuck in my brain here was that we equate thinness with being healthy. I think I have felt that myself. I feel like I probably have said things as a yoga teacher that go in line with that over the years until I had some more education. And maybe I even still do. So, how does this show up in our yoga classes, in our yoga spaces?
Oh, there's a number of ways in which it can show up because it's, again, not just the thinness being healthy, but also the belief that thinness is more morally virtuous. Um, so that can look like showing up as perfectionism or competition in the yoga space, a real marked focus on physicality, maybe the more fitnessy workout types of yoga being amplified. And really, it also shows up through our languaging. For example, if you've one example I can think of is so many spaces and places and teachers have said things like don't eat a heavy meal 2 hours before you practice. You should be drinking a smoothie or eating something light. And that's not necessarily messaging that is aligned for everyone. It's makes the assumption that you know how food and is processed in somebody's body, and it makes the assumption that we all need the same things. So that could be one way in which it kind of shows up. It can also show up with the language that we use in our cueing, um, with regard to maybe demonizing certain body parts. Um, yeah, that's just two things I'm kind of that are sticking out to me off the top of my head.
This reminds me of my hesitation at times, or being in different yoga teacher trainings, or hearing different yoga teachers or students say, I don't want to hear anything cued about my belly. And is this one of the ways that we demonize, or are there times when we should shy away from certain cues, certain language?
The way that I kind of look at my cueing specifically is cultivating normalization around the body. A lot of folks, especially in the work that I do, but I think just in general, a lot of folks hold internal narratives that are really rooted in guilt and shame. There's also a lot of folks who don't have a very great connection with their bodies and may not know how to listen to them. Um, so when I think about um, someone in their own body and in their own experience in a yoga class, there's also ideology that's held that poses or shapes or breathing even is a one size fits all, and that's not necessarily the case. So I think what's really important is to be able to recognize within yourself, right, considering your own internal experience as kind of a starting point in terms of how we can be empathetic towards others and really create more more space in that regard.
So from the work that you are doing now, specifically working in treatment centers for eating disorders, what do you think, or what do you, if you could wave a magic wand and all of the yoga teachers in the world in every class would kind of know some basic things, because as we've talked about in previous podcasts, this is showing up in all of our yoga classes. It's not just specific to, yoga for eating disorder classes. What do you kind of wish that yoga teachers knew in terms of maybe their language, or even anything else, any other aspect?
It's a great question. If I could wave a magic wand and I had that superpower, right, to shift all teachers into an alignment that we're all kind of giving the same inclusive messaging, it would really start with teachers just practicing more self-study, so that they can identify within themselves what the messaging is, and to be able to disrupt and dismantle that. I think the unlearning and then the re-education is important. I also think um, just embodying tenets of yoga, like teaching with compassion. You know, a lot of teachers just talk about the yamas and the niyamas very haphazardly, and they cherry pick aspects of those tenets, right, to kind of align with their own teaching. And I think that if we want to really root our intentions with teaching around ahimsa, that has to come with the acknowledgement that humans are humans, um, and that we really need to encourage agency and autonomy for folks over their own body and their own experience on the mat. And that just helps to meet them where they are. There would just be more inclusion around and normalization of prop usage, providing props and variations, and just giving every single person in the space an option, providing the same tools to access, and then giving the agency and the autonomy for the student to be able to make those choices for themselves with what they have. Um, if we look specifically at language, I mentioned before, really creating normalization around the body. Um, so for me, I exclude a lot of language that encourages perfection or encourages competition. I try to keep my languaging and my cueing centered around neutral points of the body for folks. So that could be like hands and the feet and the head. Um, you mentioned the word belly before. Sometimes that word choice can be really activating for some folks. So I think just considering your audience and just knowing what words or what word or words could be activating. I like to say activating versus triggering. I think the word triggering can carry a very negative connotation, but folks can be activated in so many different ways. So just to consider your word choices and your languaging, and then really to avoid any language that places a hierarchy on shapes in asanas and poses. So, for example, using language like take it to the fullest expression, I would just eliminate that.
Right.
Yeah, I would just get rid of that. I would also create a lot of open ended invitational cueing. So I try to replace words like or with and. I ask a lot of questions too in my cueing that kind of invite some self reflection. But I think like the two biggest takeaways, I know I've said a lot, so I'll stop in a second. But I think the two biggest takeaways is not to dictate the experience of what a student should be feeling and where. That was a mistake. What I consider a mistake that I made a lot early in my teaching career is, well, you should feel this stretch in this place, without the understanding that every body is different, right? Everybody's the same, but every body is different. So I can't assume that what I experience in my body is going to be replicated in somebody else's, or that sensations are going to show up in the same way. And the other takeaway that I would invite teachers to consider is to just give more permission to folks, um, to give folks permission to be comfortable, to give them permission for reflection, to give them permission to observe where they are without any judgment, from a space of neutrality. So a lot of words that I tend to use in my cueing are consider this or explore this, maybe that, perhaps, and just create it, make it very open ended, so that it just allows people to kind of be where they are, and it just creates more of a welcoming, safer space. I don't like to say safe space because we can never guarantee that, right? Because again, folks can be activated by a number of things, even with the best of intentions, we can still activate them. So I just think it's important to be able to call in those things, but then to also leave space for folks so that everybody is getting an experience that's hopefully landing.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. You've shared so many amazing points. I feel like I was frantically taking notes here. I bet our listeners are as well. Don't worry, listeners, we also take the notes for you. That's over in our show notes. And I just wanted to say here, or ask more about what you said at the beginning of sharing this with us, of doing our own internal work. Now, how do we do this when I feel like I've done some of this? I mean, I feel like it's an ongoing thing. Like it's I was raised in a culture that very much did praise thinness and tell me that thinness does equal healthy. So how do we even start to do that when literally everywhere it feels like we look, that message is there? Even recently, a yoga teacher was sharing with me that around COVID, how they thought one of the problems is like obesity, and
Oof.
yeah. Yeah, tell me what your thoughts are, your feelings are about that.
Oh, well, I read the book a couple of years ago, Health at Every Size by Linda Bacon, and that book really fundamentally shifted my perspective on what healthy is and kind of the lie that we're taught. So diet culture is really insidious. It's something that and I'm in the United States, so from a young age in the public school system, I feel like that's something that's kind of taught to us. And then it's upheld through messaging in movies, television, just in a lot of like pop culture aspects. And so in order, I think for me, and I think it's maybe easier if I kind of speak from my own experience, if it's okay for me
Yeah,
to get a
I would
little
love that.
vulnerable.
Yes.
Um, I it's like a few years ago, I kind of like woke up. I personally earlier into my teaching and into my personal yoga practice, I had a weight loss. I attached a lot of my story of yoga and coming into that with that weight loss. Less about the physical changes in my body, but what yoga really gave me was a lot more of the mental. Um, and that was kind of what brought me into being a teacher. And when I read that book, Health at Every Size, and when I started working with folks in eating disorder recovery, I really started to see how insidious like this idea of thinness equating healthy is, because I mean, health comes in all different shapes and sizes. And I know I'm kind of derailing, so thanks for staying with me on this journey. And so when I started to really recognize like that this whole idea of like thinness being like morally virtuous, and then really starting to reflect on my own personal journey with regard to the relationship I hold with my body, um, I was kind of disgusted with myself, honestly, at how I was contributing to that as a teacher, and so for me, part of my self study looks like identifying, right, what beliefs I hold about the relationship I have with my body, the relationship that I hold with movement, and the relationship that I hold with food, right, and what aligns with that in terms of diet culture. How are my internal belief systems upholding diet culture? Um, yeah, and so for me, the way it kind of looked was accepting the idea that health exists at every size, even though dominant culture tells us otherwise. And even for me, my experience with the medical or with the healthcare system in the United States, like that's another place where it's really um, perpetuated. For example, a lot of doctors use the body mass index, the BMI, as a tool, right, for assessing the health of somebody. Um, and the BMI was created by, I think it was either a mathematician, I think in the 1600s, like some European guy, and it was only based on white male bodies, and that's what we use, right? And that's what doctors use. And that's really, and that could be a whole other conversation around the medical system and insurance and insuring folks, right? And then being able to assess them, and their health based on those things. So when I, for me, when I started really identifying what those beliefs were within myself, um, and seeing what my implicit bias was, and realizing, right, that that was something that was taught to me. I had to get really, really clear and honest with myself in being able to name that, being able to call that in, and then being able to take ownership of, hey, this is where I was, and that's not where I want to be, because that's not helping. It's not helping my students outside of the eating disorder space. It's not helpful for my clients that are in recovery. So the questions that I started to ask myself, right, were what aspects of my personal belief system are being shared with diet culture, with dominant culture, beauty ideology? And then what are ways that I can start to disrupt my own belief system in order to make space for other folks in their healing? Um, so when I really started, so that was kind of how I started to disrupt, was through education, right? I read Health at Every Size. I read the book Intuitive Eating. Um, I started an intuitive eating journey on my own. Um, I started practicing a lot of self care. And then I started seeking out a lot of voices and perspective from folks with lived experience, not just of having the experience of an eating disorder and recovering, but folks in the wellness space too, who align more to a health at every size ideology, folks that use yoga as a form of social justice to impart change. So that also includes like dietitians and therapists. Basically, I just started listening to those folks and seeking them out, and then uplifting their voices through sharing it through my own social media. And the more that I sit, um, in those education or in those like learning experiences, the more it helps me to dismantle and relearn a belief system that just is more inclusive, not just for myself, right, but for everybody.
Thank you so much for sharing your own personal story with this, because I feel like I'm sitting here thinking you're one of the experts. You're one of the people that I follow. And then for you to say you really still were looking at things internally and the messages that were going on. And I think that's really, for me, it makes me feel more comfortable in my learning that I can't know everything all at once that I've
No,
learned. And I really appreciate you saying, this is in our schools, it's in our medical system. And I think that's one of the things that was shocking to me is this idea of, okay, when you go to the doctor, they have these same internal messages of diet culture weaved into their education that isn't actually correct. I mean, I felt like, what? So, yeah, I'm excited that our listeners get to question things. There's a lot of talk in the yoga world around what you should eat, how you should move, what you should look like, what size your clothes should be. And what's so weird is that yoga philosophy goes against that. Like it doesn't actually match.
you're right. It does not align. And yet there's a lot of teachers that will they cherry pick from the philosophy and they manipulate that cherry picking, right, as a means of justifying whatever their lifestyle choices are. But then it's also like placing those lifestyle choices on a hierarchy, right?
Yes.
Where again, there's that demonization. I keep coming back to that word, but it's just for a lack of better words, that it demonizes folks for like certain lifestyle choices. But again, there's a lot of assumptions that are made, right? And we haven't really touched on the social justice aspects of how problematic diet culture is, but there's a lot of assumptions that are made surrounding access to food, access to yoga teachers, access to movement practices, that it just doesn't necessarily, it's very mixed messaging, to say the least. And it's just very problematic. And that's kind of the frustration that I hold as a teacher teaching to folks in eating disorder recovery is I teach primarily from a philosophy lens, right? There's such less of a focus on the physicality or the asanas, right? So that when we do go to the mat and we do practice movement, right, and we practice asana, that there isn't this attachment to perfectionism, that there isn't this attachment to competition. And my frustration is that then they leave treatment and they go out into a world of yoga teachers that are touting weight loss or touting cleanses or fasts or detoxes. And it's just not aligned with the true roots of yoga. And again, I keep coming back to ahimsa, right, to this compassion. It's really the practice, right, of this kindness and friendliness and thoughtful consideration for others, but really it starts with ourselves. And so to me, the way ahimsa shows up is not through those means, right, of restriction or denial to self.
Yeah. Connected yoga teachers, I'm popping in here for a moment because there was a really great question shared in our Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. If you're not already over there, we have a lot of worldwide yoga teachers who share tips and ideas along with many questions. And the big thing is that we support and help each other along the way. So Adele, thank you so much for giving me permission to share this. Adele asked a question a couple of months ago, and Adele wrote and said, "Hi, Shannon. I hope you're well. Just a few questions about OfferingTree. I use Acuity scheduling with my Squarespace website at the moment, and it works well. But I'm looking to add an online membership to my website at some point. Do you find OfferingTree easy to use? Looking at the website, there are lots of features, which is great. I wouldn't need a website as I'm happy with the one I have. Thanks very much and have a good day. Now, I was so glad that Adele asked me this question in our Facebook group, and I went ahead and answered it, and then I want to offer a little bit more to all of you. So I said, hi, Adele. I'm here for all the OfferingTree questions. 1, I find OfferingTree super easy to use, and if I ever have a question, I reach out to their customer support, chat, or email usually, and they are very quick to get back to me. 2, like you, I also have my own website, and I'm happy with it. Mine's a WordPress website. And so I'm not using OfferingTree to build my website, but I love that I can embed classes and store offerings to my site. And then I shared an example of what that looked like with Adele. And I said, see how it shows up in the time zone of my website visitors. This is such a highlight for me. I don't have to do any time zone math. I also have to say, neither do the people who are visiting my website. I use OfferingTree mainly because it's so automatic. Zoom links, email and text reminders, waivers, terms and conditions, payments, they think of all of the details. So when I put an offering on there, I don't have to think about it beyond showing up to teach. Oh, and also planning my classes. So it saves me a lot of time and students are getting reminders. So it's a win-win for all of us when they come to class. And then I also sent some helpful links to Adele, like saying, here's Eddie. I tagged Eddie in this post as well, or you can reach out support@offeringtree.com if you want to find out about OfferingTree. And I said that we have a discount code. That's offeringtree.com/Shannon. And then I went on to ask permission. Is it okay if I use this on the podcast? So connected yoga teachers, I wanted to share this with you here because a lot of you have questions about how does this work? When I'm building up this library of videos and I want to create a membership site, I would say 100% check out OfferingTree. And again, use that discount code if you haven't already, offeringtree.com/Shannon. All right, let's get back to our conversation with Vivian. I'm so curious to hear how you teach. When you say that you focus on the philosophy, how do you do that? Now I'm thinking very detailed. I'm thinking, are we sitting with people and talking to them about yoga philosophy first? What does that look like in an actual where someone meets you for the first time?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I kind of giggle because Rolf Gates has this chart that's at the beginning of all of his books, which in my opinion is a really nice summary of the 8-limb path of yoga. I call it the wheel of yoga. And I can certainly provide a link so that you can put it in your notes for the listeners. But yeah, I kind of show my clients this wheel of yoga and I let them know hey, these concepts are we'll go through the wheel, we're going to go through the whole thing and it's just going to show up in different ways. So, and I'll just take the tenet of ahimsa as an example, right? Because that one, ahimsa just continuously shows up in every session that I do with clients. So we'll conceptually talk about what ahimsa is. I'm really into etymology, so the Sanskrit and kind of what each parts of the word mean are really interesting to me. So I like to share that with my clients. It's not necessarily something that they have to remember, but again, it just gives them. I just personally love crediting the source and just to give them the source of everything. So we'll talk about what ahimsa is. I might share directly from the Yoga Sutras what the the tenet is, and then we discuss it. So with ahimsa, I might ask them what are the qualities of a true friend. How can we be our own best friends? Name things that you like about yourself, right? To cultivate to cultivate that self-compassion. We might do a practice where it's maybe yin, a yin practice where we just breathe and we just notice, and maybe the noticing of what comes up is how ahimsa shows up. I also lead my clients about once a week through a practice of yoga nidra. And yoga nidra, I think, is really effective in cultivating ahimsa. All of my clients, they pick sankalpas or intentions that are rooted in their recovery. And they really, yoga nidra is something that lands really well with them. Because it's this kindness of recognizing, right, what do I want most deeply out of my recovery? And with the practice of yoga nidra being so consistent every week for them, right, then they can take that outside of the yoga room, right, into their meals or into their individual sessions with their dietitian or with their therapist or the recovery team. And so, yeah, and then I also really teach them a lot about self-care. The framework of self-care that I teach from is from a book by Anana Harris Paris. It's called Self-Care Matters, A Revolutionary's Approach. She provides a really amazing framework that's centered around categories of care. And with those categories of care, another way that I kind of, even if we're not talking about ahimsa, maybe I think right now with my clients, we're on dhyana and meditation. So we're really focused on that. But every day, every time I meet with them, I always ask them, what are you grateful for? And what's your plan for self-care? And the feedback that I've received, right, is that it reminds them to center themselves in their recovery. And again, that idea that compassion starts with me, and maybe my compassion looks like practicing self-care today. And that could look like taking a shower or taking a nap or eating all my meals or being honest with my therapist. So that's the way that I kind of approach it. And that's with each tenant. But yeah, we go through that whole wheel. So we go through all 8 limbs and we talk about the kleshas and the koshas and aspects of the spiritual practice. So I may not use all of the languaging, right? All of the Sanskrit or teach them about, like, I don't go that deep, but I give them enough to where they can see how their practice of yoga is really lived. I mean, because in the end, we live in a culture that really focuses yoga on the fitness or the physicality, on the third limb, the asana, the practice of postures. But in truth, like, yoga is a methodology that's embodied. Like, we live it every day. It doesn't require you to step into a space or get on a mat to know that you're in it. I tell all of my students, my clients included, that, when we make a conscious choice, that's not just me as the teacher, but you as the student, when we're both making a conscious choice to be present in the moment, to me, that constitutes yoga in action. And the hardest part of anything, of any practice, like whether it's yoga or life, is just showing up. So, and we can just show up and be present, that we can start to really incorporate these things.
What a beautiful gift you're giving those people that you're meeting with. I feel like then when they walk into a class that only focuses on the asana, they'll be able to pick it up. They'll be able to think, what about all of the other aspects that I know are yoga? I think that's amazing. How would yoga teachers learn more about this? Is there a training that they should take? You mentioned some books, and we'll definitely link to those. What if a yoga teacher is thinking, you know what, I really want to dig into this more?
That's a great question. In terms of resources, one book that I really, really like, that I've been teaching in eating disorder treatment centers. It'll be 4 years in May. And so when I first started teaching in eating disorder treatment centers, the one book that was a really big resource for me was Body Mindful Yoga by Vivian Selles, Yoga for Eating Disorders. Also, there's a book by Carolyn Costin that's called Yoga and Eating Disorders. I think it's Ancient Healing for Modern Illness. Those two books kind of served as like the basis of the framework. I'm not sure at this point when we'll offer it again, but last year I did offer through Jennifer's school teaching yoga in clinical settings for eating disorder recovery. And we plan to offer that at some point later this year. We still need to kind of hammer that out. But yeah, I would say like yoga for eating disorders. There's a mentoring group that teachers can join. That was also a huge resource for me, and just kind of introducing me to other teachers that are in this space, teachers that align into these same types of values, and then really just again just being able to listen to them, amplify them, and then just taking the knowledge that they imparted to me into the spaces that I'm in. Yeah. And then again, I would just say like self-study. Right? I think sometimes like as a means of avoiding ourselves, and I'm guilty of this as well, is that we want to educate ourselves into the ground. But at some point, right, we can have all the education, but it doesn't really mean anything. And it doesn't really carry as much value if we aren't like examining within ourselves, like always coming back to how can I show up in a more meaningful way? So for example, like I said, I teach full-time in eating disorder treatment centers. I teach one public class twice a week. And the way that after I teach that public class, or even with my client sessions, when I'm coming out of those spaces, I'm always thinking like, what went well? What didn't land so well, right? And if something didn't land so well, what can I do to make it better the next time, right? Like I say for students, give them permission, right? But I also have to give myself permission. I'm not always going to get it right. There's going to be times where I might activate somebody, even with the best of my intentions, right? So just again, coming back to my own self-study, coming back to my own self-observation. What cueing was I using? What landed well? What maybe didn't land well? And then I can use those points as kind of a source of inspiration for the education.
This is amazing. I love so much that you said we don't have to always focus on on our education sometimes, and that we as humans, I think, this really landed with me when you said sometimes we avoid that self-study and think, okay, the answers are outside of me all the time. um, Also, I want to highlight that you talked about working with a team, and I think that's super important for us as yoga teachers to not think, oh, I'm going to, this yoga is proven to work. And so this is going to be the one solution that this person needs. Can you talk about some of the other people that you think are crucial when people are in recovery?
Absolutely. I mean, I understand that like in the space that I'm in, that what I provide as a yoga teacher can be very beneficial, right? It can support a lot of the therapeutic modalities that clients are receiving, right, from their therapist, from their dietitian. Um, for example, pratipakta bhavana, right, the cultivation of opposite thoughts, right? That's a concept that's rooted in DBT therapy, right? So but it's also so I understand, right, that there's a lot of what I can provide that's very supportive, but I also have to really like know my role, right? I'm not a therapist. I mean, I'm studying right now and I'm in school right now to become a yoga therapist, a certified yoga therapist. But I'm not a therapist, right? Um, so I'm just kind of trying to just stay in my lane of yoga, right? In terms of, um, knowing that I'm not going to overstep my bounds, right? So I'm there for the yoga, and if somebody wants to process something, we should bring that up with your therapist. If something food related comes up, we should bring that up with your dietitian. So, um, knowing and understanding, right, that as a yoga teacher, that I'm a part of a comprehensive team, but I need to know and stay aligned in my scope of practice. Um, I don't know if that answers your
It
question.
does. That's so
Okay.
helpful. It's so helpful to know that, and I think there's a lot of comfort in that as well. I specialize in pelvic health, and when working in a PT office, I knew that I had people to lean on when something was out of my, like as you said, your lane or scope of practice. I think that that can really ease things as a yoga teacher. It doesn't all sit on your shoulders, and you are part of that team. That's great.
Exactly. Yeah,
Hmm.
and I mean, it kind of gives me a sigh of relief, right? I think a lot of teachers, and I know that this is a part of my experience, right? That we have to know all the answers. So even outside of a yoga teaching or out of a treatment center setting, right? Like maybe in a studio or a wellness space where folks are coming to me as a teacher and asking me all these questions. A lot of times my first question is, have you gone to see your doctor? Have you
Right.
talked to your nutritionist? Because again, it's like yoga can be very beneficial, right? The methodology can be so supportive in those other aspects, but it is not the one size. It's not the only solution, right? It can be very complementary, but I think like also part of the problematics that exist in the yoga wellness industrial complex is this idea, right, that like it's the end all be all, or that my type of yoga, my type of lifestyle, right, is the solution. And that's not, and again, that's a very privileged assumption to make, that we're all the same, that it's all going to land in the same way. Um, because it's not. And not everybody's the same. And what I love about being a teacher is being challenged in a way that, like, for example, with some of my clients, right, when I teach them about the philosophy and we have a discussion, there's one former client in particular that really sticks out in my mind. I hope that they're out there listening. um, because I can't remember what tenet of yoga exactly, but I remember them saying, like, that's bullshit. I hope it's okay that I curse. And
Yes.
I said, tell me more, because tell me more, because that act of resistance, right? And like so boldly speaking from from their truth of who they were and how that landed. I loved it. I was like, please tell me more about why that's bullshit. And let's talk about it. Right. Because that let me know that it wasn't a point of access for them. Right. But the feedback that they gave me empowered me as a teacher to really kind of look outside of myself and my own scope and to dig deeper. Right. So that the next time I did present that information, that it would land with more bodies in the space. And so I love that, right? But that's not necessarily. And so again, let me go back. Sorry.
No, I love this. I feel like this is so important that, I mean, I feel, let me just say what I'm thinking right now of
Sure.
what you just said is that, yes, we have this whole team and there's the person in front of us who is like the student is also teaching.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's really, and again, I think if when I had first started teaching, if that had been told to me, that probably would have crushed me.
Right.
And I wouldn't have necessarily used it as a point of, again, a source of inspiration to dig deeper, right? But a lot of like my self-study, right? A lot of my intentions, like my intention as a teacher is to always create more safer, right? More accessible spaces for folks to show up as they are. So when that client told me it was bullshit, I was like, okay, well, I did my job. but which is great. And I can also dig deeper, And so um I think and I talk about this with my yoga therapist mentor, is that every person, every experience can be life changing, right? But it's all in the perspective we carry. And it's all about being open, right? Being open in embracing truth and embracing satya, right? And also like practicing that ahimsa, that kindness. And then it's just how do we implement all of these tenets into our daily living? And so I thought that was that was one of the most egoic things, in my opinion, that I ever heard a client say is that's bullshit. It's like, tell me more.
Yes.
Yeah. So I hope that client is out there in the ether somewhere listening, like, and she knows this, like, because I told her, that she was one of my greatest teachers, and I'm so grateful for that, for that. So
I love that story so much. I also love how you said, as a newer teacher, it might have crushed you, where we take it really personally, and over time we probably can see that it's less personal, and we can really learn from those moments.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to that, as teachers, we should always, I think that we should always come from always the student, right? From the mindset of we're always students, we're always learning, right? And that learning is only going to help us to become better teachers. If we get stuck in the mindset that I know it all, we close ourselves to those types of shining moments. Thanks for letting me say that.
I love that so much. It really reminds me of parenting. I feel like my youngest is turning 17 very soon.
Oh,
and
wow.
and I feel like if I would have understood at the beginning, which maybe is impossible, that the more I can show up and be really honest of like, oh gosh, I really don't know what I'm doing most of the time here, and I am going to make mistakes all along the way. I think the same lesson is like in any relationship that we have, or as a teacher, as a yoga teacher, as this human walking the earth. Like, I did a whole podcast on how this has been like constantly making mistakes, and that's how I do my best learning. But I think there's an element there that you're saying we need to be open to like, okay, I don't know it all. I'm continuously learning. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I would love to tell our listeners, how can they connect with you more, learn from you more? Where's the best place for them to follow you or learn more about you?
Sure. I do have a website. It's vivianseles.com. The best way to reach me, the social media platform I'm most active on is Instagram. And my name, I laugh because I've had teachers tell me that my name is self-deprecating, but really I'm just trying to stick it to the man, so to speak. But my name on Instagram is just another yoga teacher. But I think as people get to know me, they know I'm more than just that. So I want to just call in that I don't think I'm just another yoga teacher. I know that the knowledge that I carry is wonderful, and that I don't align necessarily with being just another yoga teacher, but it's really easy to remember. People don't seem to forget that. And then I'm also on Twitter as a teacher of yoga.
Nice. Oh, I love it. Our listeners will definitely need to follow you on Instagram. I love following you there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And it's given me lots to think about today. And I'm curious to hear from our listeners, to see what questions they have and what they've learned today and what they might start to dig into when they do some self-study. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon. It was truly an honor and a privilege to just share space with you today and your listeners. So thank you for having me.
Connected yoga teachers, I would love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. What did it remind you of? How have you seen diet culture or body shaming or body talk showing up in yoga spaces that feels uncomfortable? Tell us in our Facebook group, or you can leave us a voice message. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com. You can see a button if you want to leave us a voicemail. It's over on the right, or a button to join our Facebook group. That's right on our homepage. Thank you again, Vivian. Oh my goodness. Every time I hear you speak, I just think you have so much grace, along with so much knowledge and information to share with yoga teachers, but also humans that want to be good humans. And I think it is so amazing that we met up in a Zoom room where I'm pretty sure you were leading the conversation that day. And I didn't really realize it. I don't know if you could tell that, Vivian, that I didn't realize that until we were well into our interview and you had talked about this coalition that you had organized, and I had just kind of crashed the party. It's a good party to crash, where people are talking about social justice and how we can really support each other as yoga teachers. Speaking of support, I want to give a huge shout out to Lorelei from Australia, who left us a review over in iTunes. I appreciate it so much, Lorelei. Lorelei said, "This is a fantastic podcast for new and continuing yoga teachers. I stumbled across this podcast when I was just about to start teaching. The moment when I realized there was still so much I didn't know," Lorelei goes on to say, "I did a 350-hour yoga teacher training, but as I graduated, I felt like I had so much left to learn. I love the breadth and range of topics in this podcast, and Shannon's openness to different perspectives allows the listeners to question and learn, no matter where they are in their yoga journey. Every time I listen, I come away with more knowledge, but also more questions. Yay! Oh my goodness, Lorelei, I love it when we have more questions. I know how Shannon and the team find people who are passionate about their area. It makes me so much more interested to listen and learn. I joined in for the pelvic health knowledge, but I'll be sticking around for connectedness, some accountability, and to keep broadening my scope of thought in the yoga realm. Thanks for keeping it real, Shannon, and always trying to honor real yoga in this podcast." Oh my goodness, Lorelei, thank you so much. I love that you came here for the pelvic health information and that you're sticking around for connecting and accountability and to keep learning new things. I'm right along with you in learning new things, and I'm so glad that you're here as a listener. Connected yoga teachers, it's my birthday this month. I was pretty quiet about it. It was like before last week's episode. But if you would like to give the podcast a gift, or give me like the coolest birthday gift ever, a review on iTunes really makes my day. We try and read them here on the podcast. Our team loves to see what your feedback is. We love to hear how you're enjoying episodes, or if you have some feedback for us, like to tell us how to do better here. We love to hear all of that. Head on over to iTunes, leave us a review. I know there are a few steps, but it means a lot when you take the time to do that, and it helps other yoga teachers find us. All of the notes also for every single podcast episode are over on our website. So today's notes are over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/293. Check it out because we have timestamps and links and all kinds of things if you want to just review what we talked about today. Now let's hang out together in real time. Not in person yet, probably. These are some online offerings, but make sure to mark on your calendar November the 3rd, which is a workshop with Jessica and Alyssa, both yoga teachers who are also registered dietitians who are very educated in how we can help people when they're dealing with eating disorders, how we as yoga teachers also can really outline our scope of practice and be very mindful about the language that we're using around bodies and food so that we are staying in our lane and not causing harm. So that's November the 3rd. You can sign up over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/anti-diet. It's called Blurred Lines, the Harmful Intersection of Diet Culture and Yoga. I cannot wait until we all get to learn together. And if you want to hear Jessica and Alyssa, you can actually go back to last week's podcast episode. They're talking a lot on this same topic. If you haven't listened already, I'll make sure to link to it in our show notes. And also, I wanted to tell you about some things that are happening over inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. So my 6-week Yoga for Pelvic Health series is now available on demand. If you're feeling like you want to practice together, I've got some recorded classes ready for you. And I'm doing a live online training on October the 24th. So that's coming up right away. It will be available on demand past the live date. So if you feel like, oh gosh, I'm listening to this later, don't worry. It's 3.5 hours. And this is really, the core information that I hope all yoga teachers and movement educators know about pelvic health. There are a lot of confusing cues out there around core and pelvic floor and all kinds of things to do with the pelvis. And I'd like to really clarify some things and ask, why are we saying these things to yoga students? And here's the information that you need to know so that you're really helping your students and not causing harm in terms of pelvic health. We also have some great guest experts coming in and talking about really cool topics inside of pelvic health professionals to close out the year. So we'll be talking about pelvic floor hypertension. That's when the pelvic floor is holding too much tension. We'll also be talking about hypermobility and pelvic health with Libby Hinesley. And then to wrap things up at the very end of the year, yoga for menopause. And I'll be telling you more about that soon. Now, to get access to all of this, including that workshop, the classes, the guest experts, you can go over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com, join the membership, and have access to everything. You can also decide, hey, I'm going to hang out here for a month and learn and cancel my membership, or hang out here for a few months, or hang out here for years and years like many of our members. That's over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. Next week on the podcast, we're switching gears and we're talking about how to plan and organize your photo shoot. I'm really excited about this topic. Lots of you have been asking questions about it, and I can't wait until you hear the interview. So make sure you're subscribed. If you're listening in a podcast app, go follow it, subscribe, do the things so that it downloads automatically each and every Monday. Also, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making this possible, because it cannot happen without you taking the time to listen and support us. Also, thank you to Suzanne, Crunch, and Sinead, our team over here, making each podcast possible and also supporting our community along the way. Alrighty, connected yoga teachers, I want to know, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?